Hello everyone, it's Ted here again. I am finally in a position where I can start recording more videos, and actually kind of a lot has changed ever since I started doing these videos about 2 years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, something like that. It's been a while. I've actually been programming a lot, and I've been getting, I think, better. So I think I have more to share. Um, I'm starting a new series, actually, and that's kind of what this video is about. What I want to do is, I think, focus on the parts that have not been touched or that I feel like there's an audience for, but it's just not being addressed. So there are things that I absolutely love about Handmade Hero, and it taught me a lot. And if it didn't exist, I don't think I'd be able to do the kinds of things that, well, I probably would. It would just have taken me a lot longer to get there. But I feel like it's not addressing certain, shall we say, market needs. So I think there's a certain contingent of people that want to do a little bit more game design. So I think that in the process of building the game engine itself, they also want to design the game. So they want to do the game engine and design the game at the same time. So that's kind of like one thing. I think another thing that people want to do is they want to start with existing rendering libraries and techniques and learn how to kind of get off the ground and start prototyping ideas without having to use any of the major engines. So that's kind of thing number two. And what that means is that, to contrast, say, what I'm doing or what I intend to do with this series with what Casey does, I want to actually just start with the rendering libraries and actually not go all that deep into the specifics of how rendering works, but rather just go into, hey, here's like a workflow that I use using mostly C++, mostly, not like the crappy C++, but like, you know, the good parts of C++, and using the available libraries that are on the Mac. So here's a workflow that I use to prototype games that's a little bit of a contrast from what you see or for the kinds of resources that exist currently. And it's something that works for me. It's something where I've actually made some games doing that. And I've made them in a way that is cross-platform and also allows you to, well, yeah, I mean, essentially it is cross-platform. So what you could do is you could say, take a game that you made, and you could then put it up on the web with WebAssembly, which I know many people would say, yuck, it's the web, and I agree. I share your revulsion. However, that said, it's just true that if you're doing early independent game prototyping, the web can be a really great resource in spite of its performance problems, just because you'll be able to get a wider audience for your game initially, just starting out. So you'll be able to get a sense of like whether or not this is the kind of thing that people enjoy playing. So I would say a great example of an independent game creator who did this would be the guy that made Slipways, Jakub Wasilewski. So he started out on the Pico 8, and he made the first version of Slipways. And you can actually go online right now and you can like take a look at that. So if we look at, we'll go to itch.io and we'll look for Slipways. Okay. So we have two Slipways, right? We've got like the pro version that the newfangled fancy, like high-res graphics, all 3D version, which I love. And we've got Slipways Classic. And Slipways Classic is actually, this is actually a Pico 8. So it's the Pico 8 emulator running inside of a web page. And so you can play Slipways on the web. So interestingly enough, that is actually a very important thing, because what made Jakob decide to go down the path that he did was the tremendous reception that Slipways got. So what he was doing is he was actually creating these games, and he was making them like little small versions of the games of it. He was making those available on the web, and then a bunch of people would play them. And some games are more popular than others, and just kind of thinking sort of dumbly like, oh, what should I make? I don't know what I should make. He just figured, well, I'll just make the most popular thing, or I'll go with whatever it is whatever web thing I've made that is the most popular, and it happened to be Slipways. So in spite of all the things that I absolutely do not love about the web, and we will be doing WebAssembly, I wanted to kind of say that there are good things about it, and actually the good things about it hopefully will give us enough momentum, and maybe we can get enough people pushing for some better practices around how the web works. Another guy I met at HandmadeCon actually had a really good idea for one change that could be pretty drastic, but his idea was that maybe the default way that web pages run is right now what it is it's like if you want to do WebAssembly, it's like WebAssembly inside of this JavaScript HTML container. What if instead it was like the opposite? What if instead it was like the WebAssembly is the primary thing that runs, and then inside of that's where you run your JavaScript and HTML? That would be a completely different paradigm shift for web development, I think more in our favor. And I think it would give us all the awesome benefits of the web, which is easy accessibility, the fact that I can put a thing on the internet and people can just play it without having to really care too much about what hardware platform they have. So there's also just kind of like this, I would say, friction that people face when they're considering if they're going to download something. Nobody really wants, especially on Windows, which is known to kind of have more viruses. There's just a lot more people that don't want to download just some random executable, and you kind of can't blame them. So I think, and also on the Mac it's sort of a problem as well, because if I do give you an executable that you didn't get from the App Store, well then Apple's operating system is it just smashes you over the face with a million warnings, and to even open an app that you got from a not trusted source. Again, I'm not advocating this policy, I'm just saying this is the landscape. You have to go into settings, and it's this really complicated thing, and you have to explain. So all I'm trying to say is that when you don't go through certain channels to get your product out there, there's just a lot of friction. And in spite of its performance problems, the nice thing about the web is the lack of friction, right? Is that anybody with a web browser can just go to a web page and can just play your game, right? And so that is, we would say if we're starting a company, we're starting a thing, we would call that early stage validation, right? And that's a stupid, crappy, generic businessy term that basically just means there's there's this huge cloud of risk surrounding us and our product, all kinds of unknowns, right? So things basic unknown number one is do people even give a shit about this game? Pardon my French. Do they care? Do they want to play this? If we put this in front of them, is this an appealing concept that they want to play? I don't know, right? So how do you figure that out, right? There's some very expensive ways to get answers to that question, right? A very expensive way would be to spend the next 5 years of your life making this really highly polished thing with 3D models and ray tracing and the most expensive types of textures and high resolution stuff, only to find that people don't like the gameplay. That would be a pretty, I think you'd kind of be hating your life after taking that path, right? Or you could start to remove some of that risk by beginning with a lower resolution version of your game, just to ask those basic questions like, do people want to play this, right? And that's basically what Jakob did, right? You start with a low resolution slipways game available on the Pico 8, and he's like, hey, I'm going to remove this one big barrier to making a game. I'm going to remove this big, massive uncertainty around just a basic question, like, do people want to play this? Okay, great. I put it up, people want to play it. So now I'm not really concerned about that particular, that's probably the most important thing that you would want to quote unquote validate in the early stage of making a games business. But we're thinking along a number of other sorts of things. I'll actually reference this book that I read in the description for this video, and it's to many of you, I think you would write it off as like one of these kind of like BS, like Silicon Valley type books. And on some level, I certainly agree. But at the same time, like, I really like the way that he approaches that the topic of removing the risks that come along with starting a business, of which there are several. So he actually goes through many different. I don't remember the actual name of the book itself. I may have a digital version on my iBooks. Just a second. But he actually goes through all of the processes. Let's see what we have here. What is it? Yeah, the 4 steps to the Epiphany. Okay, and this sounds like such a hang on, let's get back to the cover. This is going to come off as such a it sounds real businessy speak, and it comes off as kind of BS. But I would, Steve Blank is the guy that wrote it. It's the book that launched the Lean Startup Revolution. Okay, so there's actually quite a lot of value in that book, because he goes through several cases of failed startups, like things like, I'm old enough to remember Webvan, which basically failed in the 90s because they had this, they were so sure of themselves, right? They were so sure that everybody's going to want, to have food delivered to their homes. And so they went and they built out this giant infrastructure to handle orders from the internet to get food delivered to people's houses. Turned out that the amount of order volume that they estimated was something like 4 or 5 times the actual amount of demand that there was in the marketplace. And so, as you can expect, the whole company basically crumpled in on itself because their expenses were much greater than what they could bear. They built out all this infrastructure that they couldn't support with the revenue that they were making. It fell. And so it's a similar thing with games. I would say it's a similar thing in a lot of these types of, I'm going to start something, and I want to know, first of all, do people want it? How much do people want it? I want to know what there are other kinds of things that are uncertainties. So another thing that you might classify as a business risk would be something like, am I too tied to a third-party dependency of some kind? So a good example, I'm not saying this will happen, but let's say that you made your game in Game Maker Studio, okay? And I'm not saying anything negative about Game Maker Studio, or I've never used it, so I don't want to say anything about it. But what I am going to say is, what if then 5-6 years down the road, you're still making your game with this tool? What if people stop supporting it? What if the whole ship goes down, right? So I would classify this as a business risk, right? As would the guy that wrote that book. That's a business risk. What that means is you have tied your entire project, you've tied your entire well-being to this one software tool or framework, if that business goes under, you're sunk, right? And so what I really like about that book is he actually asks people to go through the steps of listing down on a piece of paper, what are the actual risks to my business, to this business idea, right? So risk number one might be something like, I don't know if people even want to play this game. I think it's an interesting idea, or I think it might be an interesting idea, but I have like no idea if anybody cares, right? Risk number two might be, in the process of making this game, I'm using Game Maker Studio, Game Maker's Toolkit, whatever. You know, I'm using Roblox, you name it. Whatever thing it is that I'm using, that actually constitutes a business risk, because what it means is, what it means is you're essentially not, how do I put this? You don't know if that tool is actually going to be around, and so if the tool goes away, then your company goes away. So part of the reason I'm kind of a fan of this particular style of programming is because I know that if I know that I'm not so tied to a bunch of third-party dependencies, and it's cross-platform by definition. So like, in order for my company or my products to fail completely, or for me to not have support for my tools, a lot of bad things have to happen, right? Not just like one bad thing, not like, oh, Game Maker Studio doesn't work anymore. Like, I'm talking like a lot of bad things have to happen. So Apple's got to go out of business, like Microsoft has to go out of business. They stop supporting WebAssembly. You know, if I port to Linux, like Linux is gone. Nobody continues to maintain any more C or C++ compilers. Like, a lot of things have to happen in order for my business to completely fail, right? And it's actually important to take account of and ask these like business risk type questions if you're going to do it. So this is sort of another angle that I kind of want to approach this series from. It's actually not going to be a pure focusing on code, focusing on focusing on how to execute something, but actually taking more of an approach that says, all right, we do want to use these techniques because they mitigate business risk. That's the idea. The reason that I prefer to write my own game engine is fundamentally it comes down to wanting to have control over my business. I don't want to be owned by another company. I don't want to be stuck to Unity. I want to own most of my infrastructure. I want it so that a lot of bad things will have to happen in order to sync my company. Okay? So what that means then is, in prototyping something, the purpose of prototyping is to eliminate business risk. And that, once we eliminate a certain kind of business risk, the risk of, do people even care about this game? Does anybody want to play it? Once we remove that risk, then that opens us up to a lot of other opportunities. So it opens us up to, say, investment, right? So all of a sudden it becomes much easier to go to somebody who has some venture capital, and then you can say to them, look, and I think this is what Jakob did. I don't want to say exactly what he did, but I think it was a lot easier. I know he got investment. I think it was a lot easier for him to get investment because he already had a game that people enjoyed playing. You know, he made Slipways on the Pico 8, and people enjoyed playing that. And so now he goes to an investor and says, look, all these people enjoy playing this game. You might enjoy playing it too. Here's a prototype. I can show you this game. People like it. Here's my vision for this game. I'm going to take basically everything here. I'm going to remove the constraint of the Pico 8 screen because it's really small. I'm going to give people this wide, expansive, full screen view of connecting planets up with Slipways. I'm going to do that. I'm going to have 3D models. I'm going to have lovely, gorgeous music. I'm going to deepen the gameplay. I'm going to add some of these other ideas. Now that, to an investor, is a much more satisfying proposition than, say, I hand you a booklet and it's got like a list of like, all of these, character classes on them or something, or it's what it is it's just something in theory. It's like, oh, theoretically people would want to play this game. I'm making a massively multiplayer online RPG, and the sorceress class does this, and the warrior class does that, and the paladin does this. That to an investor is kind of like a vague and abstract sort of proposition that they're not really sure. Basically, if you're going to invest money into something, what you want to know is that I can use my capital in a very sort of surgical way to go in, and if I pump this thing with money, right, it's already a good idea. It's already something that I know that people want. All it needs is more polish. All it needs is something more professional. All it needs is this injection of capital to the right person who I know can work hard and can run with that baton and can deliver. That to an investor is like a really solid proposition. It's absolutely something that would excite them. So we prototype to remove business risk. That's why. We prototype on the web in particular to remove business risk because that is the most accessible platform. And we prototype in WebAssembly because that is, because that is what allows us to keep the same C, C++ code base that we can then use to port to other platforms. Okay? Now, I'm not exactly going to go down that route in this particular in this particular series, partly because I want to fulfill the unmet need of there's really nobody even talking about how to do this natively on a Mac. So I think that's pretty important. That basically just doesn't exist. And then another reason too is because I think it's a lot easier to debug these games when you have like a native platform layer to call into. So one problem that I've had with WebAssembly is it's still kind of very early stages, and it's generally quite difficult to debug. That's not to say that it's not going to change. I think it very well could. But right now, in its current state, the tooling kind of sucks. And so I don't really want to start this series throwing people into kind of messy, crappy WebAssembly tooling. I do want to get to the WebAssembly port as soon as possible. But doing that, but by the time we do that, I want us to kind of have a firm foundation of how some of this stuff works on a Mac and how we might go about doing independent game prototyping using our own game engine starting on a Mac. That to me is kind of the unmet need I want to hit first. And then the next thing is kind of like pivoting over to WebAssembly. Because I do think WebAssembly is actually a very important platform to target. As much as I hate the web, as much as I agree that it's a turd, it's the turd that we have to use to give people accessibility. So, it's just life, I guess. You just gotta kind of deal with that. I want to show you the game that we are going to recreate. So this is actually a game jam game, and it's something that I recently did. It's called Moose Lutions. So this is on my itch.io page. I'll link in the description, right? And this is a game jam game that I did with some friends. It runs WebAssembly inside of a browser. And basically what it is it's a little puzzle game. So Moose Lutions is just, it's kind of like a Sokoban game, right? So you move this character around, and you put the character in front of the moose. And when you put the character in front of the moose, he gets really angry and irritated, and then he charges at you. Okay, but this actually has some like important rules to it. So if now I can't actually move into the moose now. So like I've blocked myself. If I restart, for example, let's say I took a different path. Well, now I've blocked myself from progressing past this moose. So there's something about getting through these puzzles, right? So I get in front of this moose, and I get in front of him, and I charge. If I did something else, like I can't move into this space because I'm trapped, right? So this is like an example of a puzzle game that you could make. And then I hit the flag, and it's like I get nice little music. And so this is the game design that we'll be kind of looking at or exploring for the early game prototype. And then we'll be looking at is actually how to go a little bit deeper into the gameplay of this game and how to see what makes sense and what doesn't make sense to do. And we'll actually be looking at game design. So by that I mean trying to design a game that people actually want to play, something that has depth to it, something that can actually engage people, something where there really is something to explore there. And that's just one example of a game that you could make, right? So the idea is we're going to start on a Mac. We have the explicit aim of indie prototyping, not full-on professional grade game engine. That's actually a very different thing. The goal is like entrepreneurship. The goal is actually to for you to make something that you intend to sell to people, that you're trying to test the market. So this is kind of like handmade game design / business / engine. Like it's what I want to give is the whole process, right? So that's the idea behind it. And where do we start? Well, this is going to be a lot like doing Handmade Hero if you've been following along with that series. If you followed along with my other series, that's also an excellent resource because it kind of gives you the start of what you would do. But that's got a little bit of a different aim because the goal for that is for you to pick up and follow Casey Meritori's series. It's a little bit of a different goal. This, what I want it to be is like this fully like self-contained thing that starts with the goal of prototyping a game and goes all the way past integrating metal graphics rendering, that kind of thing, doing sound mixing, basically enough to get you to the point where what you can do is use your knowledge and enter a game jam or start prototyping your own game ideas. That's actually the goal. So if I look at this game, Moose Solutions, right? Now, considering what this is, like a lot of people probably wouldn't believe that you can like make a game and that you could do a game jam game using your own game engine, right? A lot of people wouldn't believe that you could do that. And it's not that I explicitly want to dispel the notion, but it's absolutely something that you can do, and it is something that people are doing. The difference is, it took 2 weeks to make this game, right? This is a game jam game. It took me 2 weeks to make this. It took our team 2 weeks to make this. But the thing is, in spite of that, there was a lot of work that led up to this, to us being able to do this in 2 weeks. There's a lot of knowledge that had to be gained and a lot of like just sweat equity that had to be put into this. So now that we're at a place where we have this, right? Where we have the start of like our own game engine, our own way of producing games. Now that we have this, we can actually use that to make more prototypes. So the way I kind of look at it is, it took me 2 years to make my first game, to make my first native Mac game, and then it took me 2 weeks to make my latest. So what you probably don't realize when you're learning this stuff is that you're actually paying dividends in your own knowledge, or rather, you're not paying dividends, sorry, you're investing in your own knowledge, which then will pay you productivity dividends later. So while you're learning it, it may not seem like it's actually paying off, and in fact, it's going to be very frustrating. But you have to think about where you're going to be like 2 or 3 years down the road with your own game engine, your own game prototypes, starting to actually like really look into the games that you're making. So that's just something that's how I would look at it, and that's really how you can actually prototype indie games. So, I think to do something like this, or to follow along with something like this, you probably have to really, really want to make games. You probably want games to be your business. You probably want that. What I'm trying to say is this is not like some quick and easy path, right? And that quick and easy is not actually the priority here. The priority here is to gain a solid enough knowledge base and have enough of a set of tools at your disposal that you can then start to validate your own ideas for games. And once you've validated those ideas, you can then take those ideas and you can turn them into, you can use most of the same code and you can turn that into the full game itself. So that's actually what the thinking is here. And let's see, I very recently, that game Moose Solutions that I just showed you, I ported it to Mac, and after I had completed this Mac platform layer that I did, I think it took me less than a day to port that game. So what I'm really trying to get at here, I made the game mostly on the WebAssembly platform, so that's where I did most of it. But I was able to take most of that work and just straight over to Mac in a very short period of time, because it was a similar kind of thing. It was like a 2D game prototype. And that's a lot of the reason that we prototype in 2D, is because it's fairly low resolution. It's fairly easy to iron out all the kinks in the game idea before moving forward with it. Once you have a decent like 2D prototyping sort of setup going, it really does not, it's really pretty easy to port the game to different platforms, that kind of thing. So we'll actually go over that. So if you're considering following along with this series, I think that you have to have a few different goals in mind. I think you kind of have to be the sort of person that wants to get better at programming, especially games. I think you also have to be the kind of person that is a little bit more like entrepreneurial kind of bent to them. You want to learn these things not with the purpose of going and getting a job necessarily, or like showing off your skills, or even necessarily understanding deeply how things work. Your goal actually is to make a game and to figure out if it's something people want to play, and then to like build a business around that thing, right? That's actually what your goal is. So that's the kind of thing that you want to do. I think another one is if you happen to be on a Mac, right? Or that's like your only computer. You don't really have a PC. You want to learn how to make games. Starting on a Mac, that's kind of what this is for. So if that sounds like you, then that's what this is, and we'll get started, I guess. So let's see, how much time do we have here? Oh gosh, I've been talking for half an hour. Well, I guess that half-hour introduction is warranted. So we are going to remake that Moose Solutions game 100% from scratch, and we're going to start on a Mac. And a lot of what we're about to do here is, I'm actually going to quit out of some of this stuff. Good thing I actually have some of this code, but frankly, we're going to kind of, probably not going to really need it. We're going to pretend that we see this low-res jam on the horizon, and it's something that we want to do, and we're thinking about making this game. So I'm actually in my terminal right now, and I'm on my Mac. There's a few quick things that you can learn. So let's see, just talking about setting up the Mac. I'm just in a terminal window, right here. So if you go into, if you just open up Terminal, I have Terminal on my desktop in the taskbar down here. So if I just click on that, I get my Terminal. The default shell for the Mac is not great, so I have a custom setup. So I use my TB custom, and it gives me a nice green kind of thing. One thing you can go into preferences here. You can modify some of that. So if I go in here and I go general TB custom, so that's one of my profiles. I think is this one here. You can kind of play around with this. This is your developer, and this is just a terminal. So there's a bunch of different things that you can do on a Mac to kind of get set up. I actually prefer, so I do have a Windows computer as well as a Mac, and I sort of tend to prefer the Mac for doing stuff on the shell, just because it just seems like it's better. That's all I can say. It seems like the Windows shell just requires a lot more setup to get started than the Mac shell does, and I kind of tend to prefer it. So there's a few things that you can do. One thing you can do is you can, if you don't have a text editor of your choosing, you should get one. I'm going to be using Vim. I like Vim. I use NeoVim on pretty much everything. And you don't have to do that, obviously. NeoVim kind of supports a lot more different fancy colors and stuff. And another thing that I like about Vim, and I'll be showing you some of these things. I'm not going to show you, I don't want to go into too much detail on all of it. But kind of one of the things that I actually like about it is it allows me to execute stuff from the command line kind of while I'm working on things, and I can basically be in a totally mouseless flow, which is very, very nice. I absolutely love that. So huge fan of it. I'm going to enter into so I'm using NeoVim to do this, but you could also just use Vim, right? So you could use just VIM, and I would do the same thing. But what I'm doing is I'm going nvim tilde, which is my home directory on this Mac, /scratch. Now what does that do? Well, what this does is it opens up a document at my home directory /scratch. Okay, so what is that? Well, that's actually just a scratch space for me to keep different terminal commands in my computer, or things that I'm working on. So if I look at this, I just have this is that file right here on my Finder, right? And it's just some document. And sometimes it has a bunch of stuff in it, and sometimes it doesn't. It's just a big scratch space to put the result of commands into. So if I do this and I hit enter, or I hit return, now I'm inside of, see how this says scratch down here? This is my scratch document. It's actually an empty document. And I can type some text into here. I can say, hello world or whatever, right? And that's that's my text inside of my scratch space, right? Now that's nothing though, because this can become a full-on environment, which is really cool. So I can hit colon, right? And what that does, you notice how my cursor moved down here? So my cursor moved here, and now I've got this cursor right here, and I can now enter a command. Now if I just so some of these commands you can just enter in, and it's basically like being on the command line, which is cool. But it gets even better, because one of the things I can do is, in addition to executing the command, I can also read the result of the command into my scratch space so that I can see it and I can interact with it. To me, it's almost like a better version of terminal. So what I can do is I can go R, ! ls. Okay, so what does that do? Well, the actual command that I'm executing in the terminal window is ls, which in Unix speak, or basically Mac OS is kind of like an offshoot of Unix. It's like an offshoot of FreeBSD, which is Unix based. ls is the terminal command for like list the contents of the current directory that I'm in, right? So what this will do is it'll list the contents of that directory. So I must be in my, so let's do that again. I go rls. So this lists the contents of that directory. The exclamation point, what that does is that's just when you prefix any command with that. So any command that you're running in the actual terminal, you just put an exclamation point in front of that. That will run it as a command in the terminal. R then reads the result of that command. So if that command is the kind of thing that would output text into a terminal, it will then take the text from that buffer in the terminal and it will read it into your document, which in my case is the scratch buffer, right? It's just a big scratch space document that I use to kind of like navigate around. So that's what this does, is it takes the folder structure of that directory and it reads it into my scratch space document, right? Now that's pretty cool. So we can see actually where we are. So right now we are in, we're probably in my users directory, I'm guessing. Oh gosh. So this is probably, yeah, so this is my users direct. So all the hidden stuff is not going to show up, I think, unless you like give it a special flag or something. This is all my hidden stuff. So app development, applications, emails, all this crap that's in here. That's in my just my like user directory. So this is kind of like says where we are, right? Now, to move around in Vim, there's actually a lot that goes into that, and I don't know that it's best to go into too many of the specifics. But if you're just using Vim or just getting started, the whole idea behind Vim is it's kind of designed to be like user, or it's designed with like being ergonomic first, so that's really what they're going for before anything else. So to navigate around a document, basically what they designed Vim around the home row. So the idea is that I wouldn't want to leave the home row ever, or I would want to leave the home row minimally if I can. So to navigate around a document, I'm going to hit J. J kind of goes down, K goes up, L goes to the right, and H goes to the left. It's good to get used to this kind of thing if you're just kind of playing around with it. What's cool is you can navigate around a document like with one hand, which is kind of nice if you need to do that. It's pretty ergonomic. It's going to be, you might be tempted to use the arrow keys instead. A lot of people kind of start out that way. But eventually, if you just kind of practice enough, you'll get very used to just using these keys to move around. So eventually you'll get used to it. One thing I also like about, the big thing I like about Vim is it is a modal text editor, which basically means that I don't want to turn this into a Vim tutorial. That's not actually my goal, but I just kind of want to give an overview. I can actually enter commands, and these big commands can do some pretty major operations. So one example might be something like, I can go into command mode using colon, and I can say %s, okay? What that does is it just says, okay, so search the document for anything that matches the following pattern, right? And then I can say A, right? Okay, so search, maybe I can, I can say search for the word app, right? And then I can do another slash, and I can say replace it with TED, and then I can put another G at the end, which is like kind of like saying replace this globally. So now basically you can see up here everywhere where there was the word app is now replaced with TED. So TED development, TED locations, whatever. And I could do that with like, an individual character or something. I can go %s, Ted, or T, A. Basically now everything that was a T is an A. That's kind of cool. Another thing you could do, you could actually make it so that it's like specific to certain lines. So I could go %s, 2, 10, A, R. So now it will do the same thing, but it will only do it. It will only do it from 2 to 10. Oops, creating characters. Hang on. %s. Is it like this? Oops. A, R. You have to take my word. Apparently, I'm just like brain farting right now. Wait, %s. Yeah, okay. No, wait. No, that's not right. Oh. %s. AR. Oh, no, wait. Is it %210? Well, you'll just have to take my word. There's a lot of different things you can do. I apparently am brain farting right now. You can start to see the commands as you type them. So one thing I would do, I can do, like, I can delete a line of text by pressing the lowercase d twice. So I can go D, and then that removes that line. That's kind of useful. And you can see the start of the command that you have typed in this bottom thing here. So I hit D, and you see that that popped up, and then I hit D again, and it cleared the command buffer. So that's gonna, get rid of that line, right? So there's other things too I can do. I can go D and then capital G. What that does is it says delete all the way to the end of the document. So I don't want to go into everything that you can do with that with Vim as a text editor, but it's actually pretty handy, and there's tons of tutorials on it. I find it useful. I like it. I know some people are kind of like Emacs people, Sublime Text people. I'm a Vim person, so I'm going to show you Vim. Now that we're actually, in this program, what we want to do is we want to create a development directory for this project, right? So we want something that where this is gonna live. It can live anywhere really on your desktop. One of the things that I like to do is I like to set up a shortcut. So I'll show you how we can set up that shortcut to just get straight to your project directory. So let's first create the project directory, and then what we'll do is we'll also create the shortcut for that project directory so that when we start developing, we'll just be able to get right into it. And this is kind of a similar thing, like to what Casey does in his first, I know his very first video is just a ton of like setting up windows. And I actually found it incredibly valuable because I recently did set up Windows to do development, and it was like, oh my God, nobody actually talks about how you can do this, and like there's no coherent place I can go to figure this out. But I found Casey's very first video for like, gosh, I want to use the terminal on the Windows, and like I want it to not suck. Like he was pretty good at that. So this is what we're gonna do. If you are in Vim or NeoVim, you can hit colon, okay, TEX. Now what does that do? Well, what that does is it opens up a netrw directory listing of all the different, starting at your users directory. So mine is user/Theodore Bendixson 1. And now what's kind of cool about this and what I really like is I can navigate around this. The only way that you can actually navigate around it is by, this is a document. It's a document that's being read into Vim. And so you actually have to read this, you actually have to navigate this as if you're navigating in Vim, which means, you're hitting J, K, H, L, all that stuff, right? So I can go to bash_profile, okay? So what I did is if I hit /, then it'll start to take me to a place where I following those characters. So if I hit /app development, I start typing it, then it's going to take me to that folder. And if I hit enter, then I'll go to that line. If I hit enter again, then I'm in that folder. Now if I hit minus, which is like right up top next to the plus, then I can go back. Okay, so that's kind of navigating. You can actually search through things really quickly. What I like about this is you're not using the mouse ever. So it's like all on the keyboard, and just it's got a nice kind of ergonomic feel to it. That's what I like. So the thing that we're going to do in order to, so first of all, what we're going to do is we're going to find whatever place on your Mac that you want to put this thing. I'm going to put it in my app development directory, and I'm going to put it in my personal projects, and I guess I'm going to put this in like a different folder that's like, I don't know, tutorials, video tutorials or something. So, I should say that. So another command that you can do, if you're inside of this netrw terminal, you can create directories, and you do that by hitting lowercase d. And as soon as you do that, you'll see down here it says, please give the directory a name. I'm going to call it video tutorials. Okay. And that is where we're going to go. So now it creates it, and as soon as it creates it, it puts it in here, right? And so now I can hit enter on this, and I'm inside of an empty directory, right? Now I'll make another one, and I'll just call it, I don't know, what do we want to call this? This isn't Handmade Hero. It's kind of like, I don't know, maybe this is like Handmade Startup, or like, I hate the word startup though. I'm going to call it just Indie Game Prototyping Series. Because that's basically what this is. It's indie game prototyping so that you can remove risks to your potential indie game business and do so in a cost-effective manner without going and blowing a bunch of investors' money and being really sad. And that's kind of what this is. So we're going to call it that. And also, like, hopefully, you know, in the process of prototyping, you actually end up making something that you're interested in, and you're discovering this game that you're making and its potential. Like, when you're early on, you're figuring out if it's a good idea, not like, you know, 3 years down the road realizing it's maybe not what you thought it was going to be because you went like hard into 3D modeling and a bunch of other stuff early on. Yeah, so it's about making sure it isn't just about money. It's also about making sure that when you're working on something, it's actually a thing that you are going to really want to give a lot of time and thought to. So I'm going to hit enter. So now this, if I kind of navigate up here, you see that. So another command, if I hold shift and I hit V, what that does is it highlights that text, right? So that's if you want to kind of highlight the text. That also can function as a selection. We can go into that a little bit later, but if you're sort of familiar with Vim, you can do that. And then if I highlight that and I hit Y, Y stands for yank. So what it does is it actually like takes what was in that selection and then it puts it into like a buffer so that I can then paste it into my scratch pad. Okay, so you see this? I have pasted my directory that I want to go to into my scratch pad. And now what I'm going to do with that is I'm going to use that as a shortcut so that I don't have to type this crap anymore because I don't want to do that because that sucks. So I'll get rid of all that other stuff. So that's one thing, right? Now, in order to open another, so we could continue with this, but what I want to do is I want to open the file that handles all these shortcuts for us. Okay. And I'm going to do TEX, remember :TEX. You can see it down here. That's going to open up my netrw. And what I want to search for is /dash_profile. Basically on any Unix system, this is going to exist. You're going to have it. All right, so what is all this crap? This is just a bunch of stuff that this is like what my shell does on the Mac before starting up. So it like loads things. It gives me some handy, some different client working directories and like different games and projects that I'm working on. I'm able to get to them really quickly using some of these handy shortcuts. So I am just going to put another one of these into my bash profile, okay? And I'm going to call this just really simple video tutorial, because that's what this is. It's a video, not tutorial. Okay, video tutorial equals. All right, so then you can navigate. This is another thing that you can do in the netrw, sort of like in NeoVim. See, I've got kind of like a tab thing going on here. I've got my scratch pad in one tab, and then I've got my bash profile in another tab. I can switch tabs. And the command for that is gt, prefixed by the number of the tab that you want to go to. So I can go 1gt. That gives me to scratch, because what that is that's my first tab. And I can go 2gt. That gets me to the second one. If I made a third one by like doing tex to like look at the directory structure again or navigate, that is something. So if I then switched away from it with like 1gt, right? So now I'm back at my scratch pad. If I hit 3gt, then I go back to this one. So it's basically the tab number that you want to go to, followed by gt, which I think means go to tab or something. Another one, :q. Okay, so :q just quits out of the current document that you have open, which is the third tab. So what that'll do is it'll quit the third tab. All right. So I'm going to go to the first. I know this is a lot to take in. I'm going to go to the first tab. Go to the first tab, and I'm going to hit YY. That copies that line of text. Then I'm going to go to the second tab, and I'm going to hit P. And what that does is it pastes that text from my scratch pad into the bash profile document, right? So once we've got that going, then what I want to do is I want to hit J, okay, and then X. And what J does, capital J, what J does is if I'm on a line, so like I'll move that back. What capital J does is if I'm on a line, it will go to the line ahead of it or below it, and then it'll like pull it up and join it, capital J. So it's kind of it's a nice way to like join lines together. X just removes the character that's underneath the cursor, and it shifts everything over to the right. And then I hold down Shift and I hit A, and what A does is it brings me all the way to the end of the line here, and then it puts me into insert mode, which is how I type text. Typing text, you just hit I to go into insert mode, and then you hit Escape to go out of insert mode, and I hit quote then to end that out. Okay, now you notice another thing too going on here. I've got this plus sign right here, right? So what that is, what that says is that there are unsaved changes to this document, right? So if we want our changes to hold, what we need to do is we need to write those changes. So another command, I hit colon, and then I hit W, okay? And what that does is it saves the file, right? So now it says 44 lines, whatever amount of characters written, bash profile, it's saved. Now I have this saved, right? And so then what I can do is I can quit it, right? By doing Q, that quits out. All right. Now that we have done this, oh yeah, one more thing I did want to say. Actually, I'll get to it later. So now that we have actually modified our bash profile, those changes won't actually take hold. So I can't actually, if I hit colon cd $video tutorial, the operating system won't really know what that means. So you can't find that in the CD path. The reason is because you actually have to tell the operating system to like reload the bash profile thing. So we gotta do that. So we're gonna do that. So we're gonna quit out of NeoVim just by doing, this is probably one of the most searched for things about Vim, is like, how do you quit Vim? Well, you hit colon and then you hit Q. Oh wait, that's right. So it's even more complicated because we didn't write anything to scratch. See this? No write since last change, add exclamation point to override. So we didn't write anything to scratch, it's got plus. So you could do two things. You could do WQ, which will write nothing to the scratch file and then quit out. Or you could just do Q exclamation point. We'll do WQ just cause. Okay, now we're out. We're back in terminal. All right, so now that we're in terminal, if I did like ls, this is gonna tell us where we are. Okay, just basic terminal commands. What we want to do is we want to tell the operating system to load the bash profile that we just updated so that it includes the directory shortcut for this project. So that can be wherever it is on your system. I happen to pick a place on mine. I'm just showing you how to create a directory shortcut so you can get to it quickly when you start your day. So if I were to then hit, so what we want to do is the command is called source, right? And again, you can look all this stuff up. I'm just giving you the quick lowdown. You can hit source tilde slash dot bash underscore profile. What does that do? It tells the operating system to run, or to load that profile. Okay. And now you'll see no output, but trust me, it worked. If we hit cd $video tutorial, we'll be there. And so now we're actually in that directory. There's nothing in that directory. We're just in the project directory. So that's kind of how that works. That also means that when we're in NeoVim, right? So if I hit nvim tilde slash scratch, okay, and I go cd $video tutorial, it works. And you can see where we are down here at the very bottom. It tells us exactly where we are. We're in this indie game prototyping folder, right? So this is where all of our source code, this is where the whole project is going to lie. I am going to be, a bit of a, going a little bit in the direction of the popular cultural winds and picking Git as our source control. Obviously, you can use whatever source control you want. We probably won't do too much in source control. I'll give you kind of the basics of how you would do that if you're just kind of working on an independent game project. It's very different from what you would do if you're working in kind of a standard job, like on a team. It's like not a lot of branching, that kind of thing. I actually do branching on my own just because I may be like more paranoid than I should be about changing things, but all of that aside, this is where the project will live. So basically, I'll give you a quick lowdown on. I have a copy of Moose Solutions because Moose Solutions is currently in development. This is that directory structure eventually will look something like this. Okay. So it's got the source control stuff that it's managing. It's got a few other documents, like if somebody happens to be on the project and you want them to give them some notes. But I like to this is just how I do it. I'm not saying this is how everyone's going to do it, but I like to keep things. I have like my build directory. My build directory then inside of it has different platforms that I'm building to. So in this case, Moose Solutions actually does. It works. It's got a WebAssembly port. And it's also got a Mac OS port, so it's both. So if I go into say like my WebAssembly, actually I have not built WebAssembly on this, so this is not a good example. If I go to Mac OS, basically everything that builds ends up in this folder. So it's got the full Moose Solutions app. It's got debugging information. It's got the dynamic library for the game code. We may end up going that route. I actually don't think we're going to do dynamic code loading for this project. And the reason I don't want to do it is just because A, I've kind of already covered that in my other one, and B, like Casey does a great job of talking about it, and C, we want to like get to it's a little bit of getting to a quick prototype. If in the process of prototyping, we'll talk about what some of this stuff means, but basically, like, there's a way that you can load the game code. You can swap out the game code while it's running, which is like very useful if you're working on a game and you want to change the behavior, but you don't want to have to rebuild the app and relaunch it and get back to where you were. Very useful. But it isn't exactly necessary for early stage prototyping. And given that that is our focus, I don't want to cover it right away. You may reach a certain point in time where it is something valuable that you know you want to do, but not right away. So that's kind of the structure. So that's the build directory, right? And then we'll have like a code directory. And this is where the code for all of the different platforms lives. The game library is basically what I just call cross-platform code. This is all the stuff that every platform is going to need to know. This is kind of the guts of the game. If you think of the game sort of as like a cartridge, right? This is like the cartridge, right? So imagine that this is this folder is like the cartridge for your NES game, just as an example. And then like the platform would be, this is like the NES, right? But for a Mac. And basically what it does is it runs the cartridge. So that like its only job is to run the cartridge. Now that's a little bit of a fuzzy metaphor or analogy or whatever, but just to give you kind of a sense, the idea is that we have a clear separation between platform independent code, aka the cartridge, and platform dependent code, aka Casey likes to call that the platform layer. You could call that the console, the NES, whatever you want to call that. It's this here that you're seeing in this directory is the code that only runs on the Mac, and it supports running this game, Move Solutions, on the Mac. So that's kind of what this does. And then I like to have, and so we have different platforms, right? So we've got a web platform layer as well. So what this is it's the same thing, except what it's doing is it's able to run the game inside of a web browser using WebAssembly and OpenGL. So that's what this is. It's a web platform layer. And I haven't made one yet, but this would be the start of a Windows platform layer, which is basically what Casey does in his series. So Casey starts his series with the Windows platform layer. I start mine with the Mac. Potato, potato. We're all kind of, the goal is to eventually get to a point where we support all of these different platforms. And the game is this like nice clean little thing inside of its own little cartridge. And I call that the game library, and that's this. Resources is just, that's like all the stuff that goes into the game. So that's like audio files, that's like PNG files. So I'll show you some art from like my team for the game jam, or our team that we came up with. So I'll use Pixin. I don't love Pixin, but it's like kind of the best thing I could use or come up with. So we're gonna go back to let's see. Let's go to Move Solutions. Okay. Resources. So if we open up, I'll say LRJ64, this is for the low-res jam. This is all the art, right? And so this is just a big PNG. It's basically a sprite sheet, as you know. So we will be writing code. Now, we're not actually going to write the code that loads a PNG. We certainly could do that, and maybe that's something that you would want to do. Although I just don't think I don't think that lines up with the aim of this particular series, which is to get you prototyping quickly. So for that, we're actually going to use a library. It's a really popular library. You're going to use Sean Barrett's STB library for that. I love it. It's like awesome, quick and dirty thing for prototyping. So we're going to use that. So this is where all of the sounds go, and all of this is artwork and sounds, and I call it resources. So again, you may decide to organize your project a little bit differently, but this is how I like to organize my cross-platform game projects. So it's kind of up to you, but we'll actually go over how all of that stuff is done. And where are we in terms of time? We're like an hour and 10 minutes. So yeah, that's the lowdown. That's the rundown on what the goal is. To the best of my abilities, now that actually we moved and I have an office that's my own, I am planning on working on this. I want to do this three times a week, and I want to be more regular in doing it than I was in my previous one. In my previous video series, I was, shall we say, quite green to all of this, and it was actually kind of it was hard for me to even do one video because I had so little experience with game programming and game engine programming and like cross-platform development that I actually had to spend a lot of time just preparing to even do the video. And that's, so I'm now at a place where I've got a little more experience under my belt. I'm probably gonna run into all kinds of problems as anyone would, but I feel like I can actually just sit down and make videos without like this like long preamble and like getting ready for it, which is great. So now I just feel like I can actually kind of like more comfortably do this. And I guess that's like sort of gets to the point earlier that I was talking about. You know, in life, a lot of things are about doing the investment, right? So you invest time in your skills, you invest money in different financial assets in the stock market, whatever it is, and these things over time do pay dividends. So the time that you invest in these skills is 2 or 3 years down the road, it's going to pay a dividend in terms of you being more comfortable talking about something, or that's basically how I put it. So now I'm more comfortable, which is great because I can do more videos. So I'm going to end now. If you like this approach, because I know I have a small audience on YouTube, if this is the kind of thing that you want to see, by all means, please like let me know in the comments. I would love to hear from you. I suspect it is what people want, because for me, basically what I'm doing is I have solved my own problem, and now what I'm doing is I am packaging the solution to my problem for you. The problem that I had roughly 3 or 4 years ago was I did not know of a single resource on the Mac that would go through cross-platform game engine development starting from a Mac. I could not find it. Didn't exist. And I couldn't find anything that was more tailored towards game design and also more tailored towards indie game prototyping, or the idea of validating a business idea, which I know sounds like stupid and like, you know, Silicon Valley, but the generic, I could say, the idea of, shall we say, removing risk from an independent game startup by prototyping ideas. I couldn't find anything like that. So what I'm trying to present to you is that solution to my problem, because I actually had to build that. So here it is. If it's something you want, like, you know, put a comment in the description or whatever it is, let me know. And I'm going to continue making this series because I think it's valuable. So talk to you later.